Welcome, if you seek truth. The truth shall set you free. Fear not. And now the agenda with Crystal Risotti.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Agenda with Crystal Risotti. I'm the host, Crystal. I want to welcome you here to the episode tonight. We're going to be talking about education, part 2. So if you missed the last episode, that was part 1. Please be sure and go back and catch that one because there's a lot of buildup in that one to things that we're going to be talking about tonight. So let's start with the history of the education system. I'm going to do a little recap that kind of goes over the things that we talked about last time in the opening as well. There's so many things that go into the education system that people don't really understand, and so many connections and so many different organizations. I often say it's almost like you have to have a big whiteboard with pictures on it like a detective board and connect everything with yarn, because there's so many organizations tied to the education system worldwide and domestically, and they just keep popping up with new names, but it's really all the same back end if you look at it. That's one thing that we need to make sure that we're aware of. I want to make sure you understand, because we have all seen the decline in our education system in this country. We've seen it happening. It goes way, way, way back in our history with basically the way the Department of Education was created and the purpose of public education to start with. So we talked about that in the first episode. So again, go back and look at that if you haven't already watched it. We're going to be talking about how education fits in with the communist goals, which we also touched on in prior episodes. And why is education so important? Well, part of it is because we as parents hold the responsibility and accountability for our kids' education. Now, obviously, it's been hijacked over time by different organizations, and I believe we've all kind of been asleep. I'm not going to lie. I feel like we've all been asleep and kind of out of touch with what's going on. I think people started to wake up during COVID because things got exposed because of the online learning, and parents were actually hearing what was being taught to their kids. But I know, I have a child that's in his 30s, and I know when he was in high school is when they started taking the textbooks away. Okay, why do you think they did that? Because the textbook authors that they subscribe to now are often very left-leaning in their ideology. They're rewriting things. They're putting content into every subject possible and kind of intermingling topics within the different subject matters. Social studies is a big one, where you're going to find things like the whole CRT/SEL, and I'm going to always connotate the two of those together because they are linked. Even though they say CRT isn't taught in schools, it actually is through social emotional learning, or SEL. So that's found highly in social studies. I've seen it in the textbooks that you can't bring home anymore, the online textbooks. And there's just so many things to talk about around education. So you might be wondering, why have all these things been happening? Why have we had a decline? Where did it come from? Why are we seeing it? Is it intentional? Is it not intentional? Are we just getting dumber as a human species over time, or is there actually an agenda, wink, wink, behind it? And so let's talk about that a little bit deeper in this episode. First, I want to start with scriptures, and they're going to be the ones that we talked about in episode 1, but I think it's really important in case you only tune into episode 2 to know what these scriptures are from a Christian perspective. So when it comes to education, let's put up slide 1. One of the verses that stands out to me is 2 Timothy 3:16, where it says, all scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness. I think the Bible should always be our first go-to when it comes to education. Romans 15:4 says, for whatever was written in earlier times was written for our instruction. This is the purpose of historical documentation, so that through perseverance in the encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope. Then we go to 1 Timothy 4:13. Until I come, give attention to the public reading of scripture, to exhortation and teaching. We're commanded at that point to not only shout out the gospel, shout out the scripture, but also to pay attention to the teaching. And I believe this Bible verse actually deals with the teaching of the scripture, but I think it can also apply to the teaching that we give our kids. I think it's that important. And then the next one is Daniel 1:5. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated for 3 years, at the end which they were to enter into the king's personal service. This is the first mention that we see of the purpose of public education, because the king had people that actually were sent to a public education type of setup. And the purpose of it was to train them for when they went into his service. And this also screams to me what I always thought education was supposed to be about, and have had conversations with people that are school employees about. Their purpose is to train kids for the workplace. It is not to train them for life. It is not to train them values. That's a parent's job. That's a society's job. It is not to train them for gender ideology. It is to train them to be effective in a workplace. And guess what? Math is neutral. English is neutral. Reading is neutral. All those subjects that were core subjects and classic subjects are neutral. There isn't a left or right side to math. There's no division there. It is, well, pun intended. There's division with multiplication and adding and subtracting, but there's not ideological division in math unless you throw in Common Core, and that's a whole nother topic we'll say for another day. So that, again, just demonstrates the purpose of education, is to prepare people for the workplace. And right now they're crossing the boundaries all over the place. Let's look at Proverbs 1:8. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. And Proverbs 22:6, my favorite. Train up a child in the way they should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. It doesn't say he'll never depart from it. I do hold on to some faith in that aspect, but it does say even when he's old, he won't depart from it. So, we are to instill the biblical values in our kids as Christians. We are to teach them scripture. And I know a whole lot of parents who, again, think they can take their kids to church on Sunday for an hour, and that's all the biblical instruction they need. And I can tell you that that is totally not true. Your home should be saturated in biblical teaching and pointing the kids to the Bible. Even if it's a King James version and the kids don't seem to think they can understand it, they can. A thee and a thou is a you and your. I mean, it's not a hard concept. It does take some effort as a parent to do that. Moving on to some of the things that we talked about last time in the last episode. Let's go to slide 2. I want to start going over the communist goals that were taken from a book called The Naked Communist, which was written by Willard Cleon Skousen and read into the Congressional Record in 1963. He was an anti-communist exposing the communist goals through this book, The Naked Communist. And then our Congress actually took those communist goals and read them into the record. Why did they do that? They did that so we would be aware of them, so that people moving forward in history would be aware of them, so that we could fight them. Because communism has never worked well. It has never worked well in a society. It ends up being those that have and those that have not, and elites in control of the little people like you and me. It has never worked well. So our Congress was trying to get it read into the record so that they knew that people would be aware of it, but we've forgotten it, right? That happened in 1963. I don't know about you, but I'm not looking at the congressional record every day. I think it got lost, but I think it's important to point out. Communist goal number 17, the first one says, get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communism propaganda. Soften the curriculum. You want to know why our kids are being dumbed down? It was intentional. It's right there in black and white. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in textbooks. That all is happening. And part of this exposure of the communist goals is to get you to understand that, again, this has been going on for a very long time. We are now seeing the fruit of what's been planted for decades. Okay, so I just want to make sure you understand how far this goes back. And I think as we read through these, red lights will go on and you'll be able to check them off the list and see the fruit of what's happening in our society today. Goal number 18, gain control of student newspapers. Goal number 19, use student riots to foment public protest against programs or organizations that are under communist attack. Let's go to the next one, slide 24. Goal 24, eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. We see obscenity in books in schools all the time, more and more as time goes by. Award-winning authors, all right? I have a library of these books. Every time I heard about one, I bought it, and I have a personal library to demonstrate to people how bad these are. Just because you put porn in cartoon illustrations doesn't mean it's not porn, okay? They seem to think it does. Exposing body parts and sexual positions and describing rape in detail and describing sexual acts in detail, graphic detail. It's not okay. And I've got evidence to prove that it's happening. I'm sure you've seen other videos and podcasters exposing this too. It is happening. Wake up and acknowledge it. And we need to do something about it. Luckily in Indiana, we were able to get a law passed to get obscenity. There is a law in the books that defines obscenity to get anything that meets that definition out of the school libraries. Now they found a workaround that, okay, it doesn't have to be in the library because that's cataloged. But if we move it to the classroom, that's not cataloged. Or, well, we're having a scholastic book fair and the books are in the book fair. So that's not technically in the school library. It's still happening. Just be aware. Goal number 25, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. Same as above, it's happening. Goal number 26, present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Okay, again, these were written into our congressional record in 1963. Are you getting that? 1963, okay? This goes way back. And when you wonder why things have ramped up in the past 10 years promoting the gay lifestyle, homosexuality, LGBTQ plus themes, pride weeks, and all of this, because these people who are communists and had this as a goal have infiltrated every level of our government, every level, school boards, Department of Education, every level. And why? It's because we've been asleep and let it happen. We weren't aware. And that's the point of these agenda podcast episodes, is to make you aware and help you understand and see for yourself. I bring the receipts. I'm going to keep saying that. These are straight out of the congressional record. You can't argue with it. Goal number 27. Let's go to the next slide. Infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. How many people do you see on social media that absolutely hate Christians and church in general? They bash it all the time. It's prevalent in our society. Another thing, I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, you can search it out on YouTube, but there are various different churches now, and I don't want to name the denominations, but they are allowing drag queens to be pastors in these churches. And you can actually watch church services with drag queens as the pastor. They never speak about the gospel. They don't really use the Bible. They talk about the social acceptance model of everything, including drag queens, including the LGBTQ agenda. They promote that. They're not just saying, be friendly to people that fit that. They're promoting it and encouraging it and trying to affect change in that area in society. It became their God, and it's clear. It's clear. I just watched an episode where they had like a drag queen pastor, I think, or maybe it wasn't, but it was a lesbian pastor. And they actually have, instead of the Lord's Prayer, they have a prayer they recite in their church. And it's all about social acceptance and tolerance and all of that. And it has become their religion. It's funny because, they bash us for having any kind of discernment or gravitation towards anything religious, and yet they fill that void because I believe humans have a need to have a spiritual drive, right? They're driven towards something spiritual. If it's not God, if it's not Jesus, they're going to find something to fill that void. And you'll see it with the climate change agenda. You'll see it with the LGBTQ plus agenda. It has become their God, their idol, and it is something they will die for. Clearly. They'll tell you that. And let's look at number 28. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the grounds that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. That happened in the 70s, I believe, that we took prayer and religious expression out of the schools. I'm going to be very, very clear about something. The ACLJ just took a case, that's the American Center for Law and Justice, in Indiana, in northern Indiana, where I live. They are fighting a school system who is going after kids who prayed before a track meet. I want to be very clear about this because I've done a lot of research on it. The Bible is not banned in schools. Prayer is not banned in schools. The rules for schools are that the staff cannot promote it. So a teacher can't pray in class. A teacher can't read the Bible in class. But your students have every right to bring a Bible. They have every right to pray anytime they want. That's the legal standard. They cannot keep kids in the school from doing it. Okay, so just be very clear about that because I was confused about that myself. And that's why I did the research on it. Number 29, Rule 29, discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. We see that happening all the time. Goal number 30, discredit the American founding fathers, present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. Not only are we seeing them bashing now our founding fathers and saying they have no concern for the common man, but they're also saying it about politicians now. And there are a lot of politicians that I agree with them about. I think they've been locked in their closets in DC within their bubble for too long. And they have no concern for the common man because they don't even know who the common man is anymore. And so there's some credibility to that, to be honest. And when you're talking about the founding fathers, that's not true. But yet we keep hearing it in society all the time. They want to talk about how this country wasn't founded on Christianity, and it was not founded on Christianity, but many of the founding fathers were Christians, and they incorporated Christian laws and Christian ideology into our documents, our founding documents, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Even in their letters to each other, they talk about their faith. Remember, they didn't want it established, a church or religion established by the state, like they fled from England over. They wanted this to be a free country and people to be able to exercise their own faith, and the state stay out of it, the government stay out of it. That was the point of the whole thing. They were still, a lot of them were Christians. At least they claimed to be. So that's something that we see going on about the founding fathers. Have to be careful with that. Goal number 31, belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the ground that it was only a minor part of the big picture. Give more emphasis to Russian history since the communists took over. That second sentence, I'm not really sure about what they meant there, but the first sentence I do, and we're seeing that happening all over the place. 32, support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture, and they include education in this, social agencies, welfare programs, mental health clinics, etc. We're going to be talking about that. Goal 33, eliminate all laws or procedures which interfere with the operation of the communist apparatus. And we've been seeing that. They want to get rid of laws that don't support a communist type of rule. Let's go to number 39, goal 39. Dominate the psychiatric profession and use mental health laws as a means of gaining coercive control over those who oppose communist goals. Number 40, discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. It's been happening. Number 41, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents. This one I'm going to stop on for a minute. We have a rampancy of kids being taken away from their parents because their parents refuse to use their preferred pronouns or their preferred gender name. This is, I know of at least 4 cases that have happened in our country. And of course, it's just starting, right? So it takes time for that to build. One in particular, one family is here in Indiana and they're fighting it right now. But they've been fighting it for months, if not a year or more. And imagine their child being in the care of the government that whole time, away from the parents. We have, I don't know, I follow this thread on Reddit for teachers. And I follow another one for it's like ask a teacher, and then there's professor one. And I see the influence of people posting on that social media site that are in those professions, talking about not only how they cannot enforce academics in school, they can no longer suspend kids or expel kids. In fact, at one point, they were talking about how they can't even give a student a 0 anymore. The minimum they can give a student is a 50, even if they don't turn it in at all. They don't do any work. They still get a 50%. In addition to that, I see them posting things about how bad parents are. And I have to say, I don't 100% disagree with them. I don't know how many times I've been to a restaurant. It used to be, now I'm 55, it used to be when I was young that if your child started screaming in a public place like a restaurant, you took them outside so you didn't disturb the people around you. Now it's like these people sit there and let them, a whole table of people sit there and let them scream, and they don't seem like it bothers them at all. I think that's terribly disrespectful. Same thing with the playground behind my house. The kids go out on playground. It's an elementary school. They're screaming at the top of their lungs. Now, there's 2 sides to that. One, you could say, yes, let them do it outside so they're not doing it in school. But I would submit to you that whatever you allow, you teach, right? So kids don't shut it off. If they're allowed to scream like hellions outside the whole recess time, and trust me, many of them do, what would make them not do it at home or not do it in a public place or not do it in the classroom? What would prevent them from that? I mean, it's crazy. The other side of it is, again, let them get it all out while they're at recess. Maybe you could make that happen. Not sure. But I look at it like they have never been taught self-control. They're screaming at the top of their lungs because they've never been taught self-control. And if you've never been taught self-control, how do you control yourself in every possible situation? So, I mean, that's just something that I think is another thing that we have to deal with. But there, again, are teachers that do not like parents. I could tell you the teachers' unions don't like parents. They want to separate kids from the parents. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from teachers, from sites that I follow, social media sites, where they will push the fact that they're a trusted adult. Even in their teaching resources, they say find a trusted adult. They do not encourage kids to talk to their parents about things. They want to call it a trusted adult. They label it that way. Why do you think that is? Because one, they have this mindset that every kid is a possible abuse victim. Now, I can see some to that because I think over time we've gotten worse and worse as parents to kids. I don't think we've done a good job with that over time. And I'm not judging. Trust me, there's things I look back on as a parent and wish I had done differently. I think every parent does. But I think the desire to do well as a parent is convoluted because we have more people working in the workplace. You know, back in the day, the wife stayed home, the dad went to work, and the wife took care of everything at home. Now we have parents that are working multiple jobs in the workplace. You don't have time to be present. You don't have time to think through teaching opportunities. So I think that's part of it. And so we have a decline in parenting as well. And there is some credibility to that. But then also, it is not a teacher's place or a school's place to pull kids away from their parents or try to take the place of their parents. Goal 42, create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition, that students and special interest groups should rise up and make a united force to solve economic, political, or social problems. How many protests have we seen on college campuses lately? A lot. So I think it's important to recognize that there is an agenda behind all of this. There has been for decades. And that's the point we need to start from. I'm going to switch over to talking about a couple of organizations called CASEL and SEICUS. I am grateful to a mentor of mine. Her name is Rhonda, and she educated me on all of this stuff. She was really the one that introduced me to this content, and I'm really grateful for that. And then I just went down rabbit holes myself in addition to that. So, and there's just so much to it. So I want to share it with you. So CASEL is an organization. They promote social emotional learning, so SEL. They're also considered an authoritative organization. So schools do subscribe to their methodologies and ideologies. They are a leader in education, and they are viewed as professionals and consulted. So I want to show you the social emotional learning circle, the CASEL wheel. Let's put up slide 6, please. This wheel, you're going to see different concentric circles around things, and it deals with, what I want to point out to you is it starts in the middle with the SEL, right? Social and emotional learning. Then it kind of expands out to show you what that means, what they consider it to be. You've got self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness, and self-awareness. And then it expands out to show the partnerships in their minds with how they implement it. So then you have the SEL instruction in classrooms. You have school-wide culture, practices, and policies in schools. You have authentic partnerships with families and caregivers. And then you have aligned learning opportunities with communities. So they are really infiltrating a whole community with this kind of social emotional learning. They even say in the CASEL doctrine, I say CASEL doctrine humorously because that's not really what this is. CASEL doctrine is a whole different thing, but it just kind of fits and it makes me laugh. But in this CASEL framework, they talk about how it's an integral part of education and human development. So they see it as a starting point for children. You get them into understanding their social and emotional learning aspects, characteristics, things they're attracted to, things that they need to recognize from a character standpoint. And then they claim that helps kids with the learning process. Now, I struggle with this because we do have a lot of kids who don't have a good home life. Let's start there. I often say the government puts things in place to help structure when we as the people don't self-govern. Okay? So when we as a people don't do things right, somebody has to. That's how the government views themselves. Somebody has to step in and make it right. If we are declining as parents, then we're leaving our kids neglected with social and emotional stuff. And I believe that's why the schools think they're being virtuous by stepping in and teaching kids this kind of content. We'll go through details of what it looks like in practice. But they think they're doing something good with these kids because these poor kids are traumatized, or these poor kids have a bad home life, or these poor kids are either abused or going to be abused. And so we have to jump in and save the day, and we have to teach them how to have social skills, proper social skills, and how to be emotionally intelligent and embrace their emotions and how to deal with all of that through the learning process. And I get that they think they're doing something virtuous. Where I have a problem, and I think you will agree, is for the good parents. Like, you err on the side of caution, right? So again, traditionally school was to teach kids how to be in the workplace, how to thrive in the workplace. We're talking about tangible skills, reading, writing, math, things that actually were tangible things they would use in the workplace. And we left it traditionally to the parents to bring them up with the values that they embraced, right? We left it up to the values being taught through society, through their local society, through their local circle of influence. The people they love, the people they care about, they learn values from them, right? It is never in history until fairly recently, I believe, been the school's job to teach kids that emotional maturity or that social maturity. It shouldn't have been, because you don't know who every single teacher is that your kids have. You might have them as an acquaintance. You might have met them at a parent event or something. Same with the principal. I can tell you there were many times my son was in school. We moved a lot, so he went to different schools. I had never met the principal. I never saw him. Or her. I never knew who they were. Okay? Ask yourself, do you know them? Do you know every teacher that your kid has throughout the day? Do you really know them? Or do you know them from an acquaintance standpoint? You've met them. You might have briefly talked to them at a parent meeting, but do you really know who they are? Because here's the thing. They're coming now through universities who are forcing them to teach this stuff and indoctrinating them with these concepts so that they can then go indoctrinate your kids with these concepts. And I guarantee the majority of teachers are not going to identify values that Christians have. They're not going to line up. And I'll tell you why as we go through this. Let's look at slide number 7, please. What do they mean by social awareness? They say the abilities to understand, perspective of, and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and contexts. Okay, that's absolutely admirable, right? It sounds so virtuous on the outside, and this is something I kept saying in the last episode. These things sound so harmless, helpful, virtuous when you first read them. But then when you start critically thinking about them and diving into what do they actually mean or what could this mean, it's a different story. This says, this includes the capacities to feel compassion for others, understand broader historical and social norms for behavior in different settings, and recognize family, school, and community resources and supports, such as taking others' perspectives, recognizing strengths in others, demonstrating empathy and compassion, showing concern for the feelings of others, understanding and expressing gratitude, identifying diverse social norms, including unjust ones, there's a key word, recognizing situational demands and opportunities, and understanding the influences of organizations and systems on behavior. Okay, couple things about this. Number one, do you see alignment with what they're promoting to teach, these values that they are promoting, with the Bible? Because we are supposed to have empathy for others, are we not? And recognizing strengths in others is a great thing, is it not? Demonstrating compassion, showing concern for the feelings of others, these are all aligned with Christianity, right? Until it's not. And what do I mean by that? If somebody, I'm going to use an adult situation, for example. Charles Manson. Does everybody know who that is? He was a psychopath that murdered people, okay? He had some group of these groupies that went around with him. He was a cult leader. Very weird guy. Had an upside down cross tattooed between his bridge of his eyes. Creepy dude. Should I, as a Christian, express empathy and compassion towards him? Should I, as a Christian, think that he has strengths, though? He was able to influence people. That's a strength, right? He influenced a whole camp of people into doing really bad things. Should I look at him and say, well, the punishment he received is really unjust, because nobody should be on death row, capital punishment. Nobody should be put to death. It was really unjust. Situational demands and opportunities. Should I look at him and say, well, his upbringing just really wasn't good, so I feel bad for him? Or should we call evil evil and call it a day? Now, I can be against something and not treat somebody unkindly. And I would venture to tell you, I never have been in this situation, but I believe, based on how I'm made up in my value system, that if I met Charles Manson face to face, I don't think I would treat him badly. I think I would be cautious in even speaking to him, and maybe just, observant about his behavior. So I was just situationally aware, because he was really out there, but I don't think I would treat him badly. Still, should I embrace his behavior? Should I be inclusive of his behavior? Should I excuse his behavior based on his past? I don't think so. Those are two different things. If I am a child in a classroom and I've been brought up in a Christian home and I know that God made Adam and Eve, man and woman, two genders, nothing more, and I'm in a classroom where there's a kid from a very liberal family, a very progressive family, if you will, and they let them choose their gender. I don't have to be unkind to that child to be against the lifestyle or the choices, right? I don't promote that. You should not be unkind to people. At the same time, I'm not going to embrace it either. All right? Because I shouldn't have to. Do you think that if we believe something is absolutely wrong in God's eyes, that we should still be accepting of it from an ideological standpoint? I don't believe that. We're to call it black and white. It's either of God or it's not. It's of the devil. It's one or two. There's not gray with that. And when you look at the agenda behind these things, it becomes clear that their goal is to break down social norms. They want to break it down because they know that breaks down a society. And then communism can rise and take over. That was the whole point behind it. The social norms don't always align with the Bible. And we're to follow God, not man. It doesn't matter what the government tells us if it's misaligned with what the Bible says, what God says. We don't accept it. All right? So, again, doesn't mean we treat people badly because they're different. We shouldn't do that. But I also don't want somebody who's not a spiritual person, somebody who's not a Christian, teaching values to my child. As Ken Ham says, would the Israelites send their kids to the Philistines to train them? No. Why? Why wouldn't they? The Philistines were pagans. They didn't believe in God. They didn't have biblical principles. They didn't embrace the biblical lifestyle. They didn't care what God thought because they're pagans. They did what they wanted to do. The Israelites cared about their kids too much. They wanted what was best for them, and they knew what God planned was what was best. The Bible doesn't have restrictions in it because God's a punishing God waiting to punish you with the gavel and throw it down and hurt you and drag you through different circumstances to punish you if you screw up. That's not who he is. He's a loving God. The things that are in the Bible that are restrictions are there because he loves us. They're there for our own good. All right? If my child wanted to go to the ice cream store and get 10 pounds of ice cream and eat it, would I as a parent be a bad parent for telling them no? Or would I be a good parent because I know the outcome past just eating the ice cream and I know that's hurtful for them? All right? That's the same mindset God has. If my kid wants to go play in traffic in the street, should I let them just because they just want to do that? No. Why? Because I know the potential risk. I know the potential problems that can come from that. I don't want my child to be killed by an oncoming car or truck. I don't want them to be put at risk. I don't want them to be in danger. It's not because I'm waiting for them to screw up so I can punish them. It's because I want to protect them. And that's the same with the Bible. Again, there are so many teachers. There are good ones. Obviously, there's always going to be good and bad. The problem is it only takes one bad apple to spoil the bunch, right? So do you know the teacher that's teaching your kid? Do you know what kind of values they embrace that they're going to pass on to your kid? It's not, SEL is not bad in what it teaches. The bad part about SEL comes in how it's taught. Okay? Make that stick in your mind. It's not about what's taught. It's about how it's taught. And it only takes one activist teacher to flip these values around into something that's not godly and to influence your kid. Let's go to slide 8, please. Okay, this is their slide on self-awareness. The abilities to understand one's own emotions, thoughts, values, and how they influence behavior across contexts. I have 2 big issues with this one. And I'll let you read through these on your own because I want to keep moving through. But why is it the school's business about how my kid deals with their thoughts and values and emotions? Why is it the school's business? Why should they be the ones teaching my kid about this? Furthermore, your school counselors, they're not the ones teaching SEL. Your teachers are. Okay? They're doing it in their classrooms. They are not qualified as psychologists or psychiatrists or even licensed clinical social workers. They're not qualified in that. So again, to me, they're not credentialed to teach my kid about this type of content. Let's go to slide 9. This is about responsible decision making. They're teaching the kids responsible decision making, meaning the abilities to make caring and constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions across diverse situations. This includes the capacity to consider keyword ethical standards and safety concerns, and to evaluate the benefits and consequences of various actions for personal, social, and collective well-being. All right. They go on to say demonstrating curiosity and open-mindedness. When they say open-mindedness, what do they mean? Are we to be open-minded to everything out there, to everything possible in the world, and even things that are considered social norms that conflict with our Christian values? Are we supposed to just be open-minded and accepting of it? We're not. So they're teaching kids to be open-minded, to accept everything. All right? It's not good to be too open-minded, I'm telling you. You don't want to be closed-minded either. I know I'm going to get bashed for that online. But you have to protect that whole thing about open-mindedness, because I believe that thoughts get planted, they get entertained, and they become actions, especially when it comes to kids. Thoughts are seeds that get planted. The kids ruminate on that. They think about it. And before you know it, those thoughts become actions. That's why it's so important to protect a child's mind. Protect the innocence in their mind. They're bombarded every day with things from social media and media in general, and even people around them at school. I can't tell you how many times I hear the F word coming out of kids' mouths on the playground in the elementary school behind my house. Flying, all the time, or GD, or, whatever. Your kids are exposed to all of that. You have to teach them how to protect their mind. And we as parents have to protect their mind. So I think this open-mindedness is just total garbage. Then they talk about learning how to make a reasoned judgment with analyzing information, data, and facts. They're going to push evolution. If you don't believe in evolution and you embrace creation, their data and facts support evolution in their minds. We know differently, but that's what they embrace. So when they talk about teaching your child to make a reasoned judgment using information, data, and facts, and then couple that with the open-mindedness, that can change your child's way of thinking. If they're promoting facts and you're not giving them the counter facts, guess what? Guess who's going to win? Or maybe they mean making a decision to do something based on their distancing from church and move towards social norms. I keep I keep hearing things like that too. Again, I told you on social media sites, even with the teachers and professors on Reddit and different sites bashing Christianity and church. Now, we have our faith and we have things that we determine to be facts based on our faith. But and there are scientific facts to back up Christianity too. But if you're not well versed in all that, then it's a spiritual thing, right? So if they're presenting your child with facts and figures and your child doesn't know any different to be able to defend Christianity or Christian principles, who's going to win? They're promoting facts. They're promoting data. So just give that some thought. Slide 10, please. And we're going to talk about SEICUS, which is Sex Ed for Social Change. I want to move from CASEL into SEICUS. So in the last episode, we talked about the Center for Disease Control, or CDC's Whole School, Whole Community, Whole Child Initiative, which is referred to as WISC. I'm going to refer to it as that for the rest of the time. SEICUS is actually part of that initiative, and it's comprehensive sex ed. That's what it's all about. I want you to notice that they even mention on their page for social change. Do you see that below the word SEICUS? Sex ed for social change. Tell me that's not an agenda. It's right in front of your face. It was formed in 1964. Let's look at slide 11. I want to talk a little bit about what they say their vision and values are. Their vision is to have an equitable nation where all people receive sex ed, are affirmed in their identities, and have power to make decisions about their own health, pleasure, and wholeness. Okay. First of all, they want to promote sex ed for everyone. But I can tell you we're not talking biological or reproductive sex ed. So make sure you have that understanding going into this. That's not what we're talking about. They're talking about affirmation of identities, right? So gender affirmation. We've seen how that can be destructive in our society, just not even considering counseling for kids that think they might be a different gender and just gender affirming them right through. I just saw today that Europe has now put a law in place that they cannot do any kind of treatments for children under 18 for gender ideology. No treatments, no hormone therapies, no hormones, no surgeries, no nothing. They've learned. Denmark has learned. They've backed off. The U.S., though, is going full steam ahead with all this affirm. Guess what? There's such a thing as a tomboy, because I was one. I fully believe if I were growing up today that they would be pushing me into this ideology. And it is an ideology, by the way. It is not fact. There's no science backing up gender identity issues. It's still a mental health issue. And they want people to have power to make decisions about their own health, pleasure, and wellness. No, the pleasure part. So I'm stuck on what I can say about that. I get the pleasure part, but that is not the purpose of it as God designed it. God's design for it was to be fruitful and multiply. And it was a gift to us, but it was to be shared only with one person. I don't know, again, that I want the Philistines teaching my kid about the proper way to do sex things. I'm not sure I want that. I don't know what they embrace, right? So that's part of the purpose of these videos. Now let's look at the values. SEICUS recognizes that good sexual and reproductive health is a human right. So they don't focus on reproductive health. It's sexual and reproductive health. So their definition of sexual health is just have fun. SEICUS advances comprehensive sexuality education as a means of building a foundation for a long-term culture shift that will positively impact all levels of society, particularly issues of gender and racial equity, sexuality, sexual and reproductive health, consent, personal safety, and autonomy. Pointing out gender equity here, that's one of their goals. They are big on the gender ideology spectrum. They also are telling us right there that they want to build a foundation for a long-term culture shift. So historically, we had Judeo-Christian principles about sex and about the purpose of it and the rules around it. And we've slowly as a society come away from it and away from it and away from it. Until now, we go back to the communist goals to promote promiscuity. And that's exactly where we're at. The next value is SEICUS commits to working to dismantle the systems of power and oppression, which perpetuate disparate sexual and reproductive health outcomes and incubate stigma and shame around sex and sexuality across the intersections of age, race, size, gender identity and expression, class, sexual orientation, and ability. This is where I'm telling you it's a free-for-all with SEICUS. When they talk about comprehensive sex ed, they mean comprehensive. They're not talking about sex ed like mom and dad used to have. They're talking about comprehensive. We're talking about teachers bringing sex devices and tools and toys to school to demonstrate to kids. We're talking about object lessons with sex ed. Nothing is off the table. They don't care about the biology aspect of it or reproductive aspect of it, which means they're teaching kids about anal sex. They're teaching kids about everything under the sun that you can possibly do. Doesn't matter the gender of the two people. They are also promoting the removal of shame around sex. And what they mean by that is directly on us as Christians, because we have a biblical worldview, that sex was between a man and a woman for the purpose of reproduction. They do not agree with that, because if somebody's promiscuous, they think that we are going to shame them. They think that we're going to look down on them and be horrible to them because we don't embrace their values. Okay, so they see us as people who would shame people who want to just have sex, promiscuous sex. So that's directed at Christians, I can tell you that. And other, I won't say just Christians, I'll say other religious affiliations that also embrace that same ideology. SEICUS applies an intersectional lens to ensure people's real lived experiences inform our policy, education, and strategic communications work. I'm not going to deal a lot with that. I'm providing references and links at the end of this in the below description so that you guys can actually go and read this stuff in detail yourself. I don't want to deal with reading every single thing in each screenshot, but there are some that I think it's really important to make sure you understand holistically, because if I skip around too much, I'm not sure you're going to get the whole picture. So let's look at slide 12. This is talking about their strategic communications. Shape cultural and societal narratives by applying a multifaceted approach in all communications with a strong organizational website, social media presence, relevant opinion pieces, and bold position statements. Again, they're talking about shaping our culture and shaping societal narratives. Educate and inform the broader public through media appearances, speaking engagements, and other high visibility activities. Again, we're seeing this all infiltrating our culture. I believe the Grammys were on the other night, and I believe John Cena was nude, essentially, in the Grammys. Oscars, thank you. Yes, perfect. I don't watch them, so I don't really know. I just caught the headlines about it, but I mean, it's everywhere. It's pervasive in our culture. Why did he need to do that? Why? Ask yourself that. There is a reason why people do everything they do. Just think about it. Expand our communication channels with partners using both traditional and social media to eradicate, inform, and mobilize communities. Yeah, so this is talking about traditions and expanding communication channels. They want to get the word out with people. And you're going to see in a little bit all the partners they have. It's extensive with these people that are going into schools. And again, SEICUS is somebody that schools consult with and get resources from and teaching materials from. There's somebody the schools get curriculum from. So make sure you understand that. They're one of the main ones. All right, slide 13. Here's part of SEICUS's agenda as well. If-then series, abortion access. If you cared about abortion rights, then you should care about sex ed. This eye-opening fact sheet of the if-then blah, blah, blah. So on the right side, and you probably can't see this, but again, there's going to be a reference, so I encourage you to go look it up yourself. I want to read some of it out of this if I can see it myself. They're talking about comprehensive education is education that works. They're talking about all kinds of details about abortion and what they stand for in this. So if you look at the top right, you'll see if you care about abortion access, then you should care about sex ed. They are linking promotion of abortion access directly to the sex ed. And I know that usually we think about that in reverse. We think about it in terms of, we promote sex ed to prevent abortion, but they're doing a flip-flop on this one. They're saying, let's start with abortion access, the ability to have an abortion. If you care about abortion access, then you need to have comprehensive sex ed. So they're reverse engineering it. All right, let's go to slide 14. I want to tell you about this Real Education and Access for Healthy Youth Act of 2021. I want you to notice they're all Democrats that voted for this. If you wonder why, like what part of the political spectrum you should be on, this is a good indicator. But I encourage you to go back and read the platforms for each party, and that will help you decide exactly which side of a political aisle you should be on. I personally am an independent. I reserve the right to vote for whoever I think is best, and I will not pledge blind allegiance to any party. But I'm also a conservative, so you figure it out. So in this article off their website, they're talking about the Real Education and Access for Healthy Youth Act combines the most important components of last Congress's Real Education for Healthy Youth Act. I'm going to start calling it REA because that's what it says. And youth access to sexual health services bills to ensure that youth have the access to the resources and health services necessary to make informed decisions about their reproductive and sexual health and future. Above that, it talks about providing them comprehensive sex ed and increasing access to sexual and reproductive health care and related services. You see how they're separating out the reproductive health from sex? Again, when we were young, at least when I was young, sex ed was all about reproduction and it was about biology. So using biology, technical terms to describe the reproductive process. It's no longer that, folks. It's no longer that. Let's go to slide 15. REA expands quality sex ed and provides young people with sexual health services that Promote and uphold the rights of young people to information and services that empower them. They see sex as a power tool to make decisions about their bodies, health, sexualities, families, and communities in all areas of life. Are evidence-informed, comprehensive in scope. There's that comprehensive word again. Back in the day, you just had sex ed. Now they've embraced comprehensive sex ed. I'm going to tell you again, it's not the sex ed of your parents. It's comprehensive, meaning incorporating everything possible. Again, kids are impressionable. Brains aren't fully developed. They're well into their 20s. You plant thoughts, seed thoughts in their mind. They entertain it, and it can become actions. Our job is to arm them against that, to not have actions where society may think it's normal. As Christians, we can't do that. They say confidential, equitable, accessible, medically accurate, and complete. What does complete mean? I'm teaching you to look at these things and read between the lines. Age and developmentally appropriate. Well, you know who's making that decision? It's the lovely experts in the field. And I'm going to say it this way. What do you call a medical student who has a D average? Doctor. And when you go to the doctor, you don't know if your doctor was actually one of those that slid by the skin of their teeth or if they were a straight A student. It's the same here. It's all subjective. So who's teaching your kids about what's appropriate? Who's teaching your kids about what complete means? Who knows what that means? Who's teaching your kids about sex in a culturally responsive way? What does that mean? Social norms. Well, I'm sorry, but I don't embrace social norms, and I don't think we should as Christians when it comes to this topic. Social norms say it's okay to kill your baby. Sometimes after birth. Just ask the former governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe. He was okay with it even after they were born, and talked about their job would then be to make it comfortable until it died on the table. Well, I'm sorry, I don't accept that. It may be socially acceptable. That's not biblically acceptable. Okay? I don't want those people teaching my kid what's appropriate. Provide information about the prevention, treatment, and care of pregnancy, sexually transmitted infections, and interpersonal violence. Just to let you know, the industry is also using that interpersonal violence piece to influence your children also, just so you know. Again, a lot of them think every parent out there is a possible abuser. So, and they're a trusted adult, whereas the parents aren't. So that's happening. Provide information about the importance of consent as a basis for healthy relationships. That's okay with me. Provide information on gender roles and gender discrimination. This is where I have a disconnect again. It makes me so mad that we have these professionals that are trying to plant these seeds in our kids' minds, knowing full well what they're doing, but coming across with the whole, it's virtuous. I'm doing them a favor. I'm helping them. No, you're not. You're harming them. Get it right. You're harming them. You're planting seeds that don't need to be there, and those seeds are going to confuse them. Who's the author of confusion, Christians? It's not God. The Bible straight up says God is not the author of confusion. So who's trying to confuse your kids? Who's trying to confuse society? I'll leave that right there. Provide information on the historical and current condition in which education and health systems, policies, programs, services, and practices have uniquely blah, blah, blah. I'm going to skip that. Redress inequities on the delivery of sex education and sex health services to marginalized young people. promote gender equity and inclusivity of young people with varying gender identities, gender expressions, and sexual orientations. There it is again. When they call those terms out, they're telling you they're teaching it. Otherwise, they wouldn't even put it in their documents. They're focusing on it. They're teaching it. They're planting the seeds. And people don't like the term grooming. Well, guess what? I'll just use coaching. How about that? People think we misuse the term grooming when we talk about these people, misuse the term groomers when we talk about these people. But those terms just mean breaking down inhibitions. Okay, so that's what those terms actually do. So it's appropriate. But since it's such a hot topic to use that term, I'll just use coaching. They're coaching kids. Let's go to slide 16. On this slide, it talks about the REA Act, ensures no federal funds under this act may be used for programs or services that, and I'm going to point out a few to you. Number one is promote gender or racial stereotypes or are unresponsive to gender or racial inequities. So they can't spend any federal funds on any organization that doesn't do that. Promotes gender or racial stereotypes or are unresponsive to gender or racial inequities. So under the REA Act, if you don't agree with the gender ideology, then you can't get federal money. You see that? Another one, fail to address the needs of pregnant or parenting young people. When they say address the needs, they include abortion in that, just so you know. So if you're an organization and you don't want to teach kids about abortion, you can't get federal funding. Fail to address the needs of survivors of interpersonal violence, meaning incest or molestation. Fail to be inclusive of individuals with varying gender identities, gender expressions, and sexual orientations. Again, if you don't include everyone, because this is SEL related, right? So social emotional learning, you have to be inclusive. You have to be compassionate and empathetic to everyone, right? Although I don't think it's reciprocated towards Christians. It's weird. But if you don't embrace that, you can't get federal funding. And the next slide tells you who the partners are. These are endorsing organizations for siecus. And I'm not going to go through all these. Obviously, there's a lot of them. You'd be surprised about some of them, probably many of them. But I will leave a link below for you to go and take a look at this document. Again, Planned Parenthood, that's one big one right out of the gate that jumps out at me. But there's several that you're going to want to know about. This one doesn't make any sense. Women of Reform Judaism. That's a weird one to me. National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. Advocates for Intersex Youth, International Association of Providers of AIDS Care, so on and so forth. And this brings us back to the World Health Organization under the UN, because they have a big part in this. And this is my wrap up, basically closing out this episode, but I want to bring it back to the WHO. Let's go to slide 18. This is from the WHO's website. Comprehensive sex ed gives young people accurate, age-appropriate information about sexuality and their sexual and reproductive health, which is critical for their health and survival. The United Nations technical guidance is referenced here, and so I'm going to be looking and showing you some things out of their technical guidance because it's interesting. So this says, while comprehensive sex ed programs will be different everywhere, the technical guidance, which was developed together by UNESCO, which is the UN education branch, UNFPA, UNICEF, did you know they were involved? UN Women, UN AIDS, and WHO, recommends these programs should be based on an established curriculum, scientifically accurate, tailored for different ages, and comprehensive. So that's where this is coming from. Do you understand now? We are not a sovereign nation anymore. This stuff is being pushed by the globalists at the United Nations and all of their partners. This is not coming from people in our country. It's part of a bigger issue. And remember the communist goals. I'm tying it all together because the UN, well, there was the communist goals. The UN is trying to enact those communist goals. And we have people within our country that are communist, that are buying into it, that are partnering with the UN and all in with them and carrying out what the UN is directing. Do you understand that? We saw it with the vaccines. We talked about it in an earlier episode where the UN, they're so sneaky about this. They recommend things to countries. They don't make them do it. Okay? That's their out. But there's consequences if you don't. That's coercion. It's almost like blackmail. It's like, you're going to do this. You still have a choice not to, but if you don't, here's the consequences. And who's going to say no to that, right? Again, with the comprehensive topic here, label. And then they talk about topics covered by CSE, which they're calling life skills, family life education, and a variety of other names, include but are not limited to families and relationships, respect, consent, bodily autonomy. Why do you think they throw bodily autonomy in? It's true we have bodily autonomy unless it's, the pandemic. Apparently that's when it doesn't apply. But we do want bodily autonomy. But when they talk about that, they're talking about abortion rights. Okay, so that's what they're associating it with. Anatomy, puberty, menstruation, contraception and pregnancy, and sexually transmitted infections, including HIV. Let's go to slide 19. This one talks about, it's also out of the same technical document, but it talks about comprehensive. And it says CSE provides opportunities to acquire comprehensive, accurate, evidence-informed, and age-appropriate information on sexuality, blah, blah, blah. It goes down and lists, the same things that we looked at in the slide before, only a little more detail. But the point of this is, do you see how they keep saying, they talk about family stuff and they keep saying the word comprehensive. That's what I want to get to you. In that same slide, they talk about values again, about halfway through, personal and shared values, life and interpersonal relationships, cultural and social norms. There's that again. Guess what? Those norms are becoming more and more misaligned with biblical teaching every day. Gender equality, non-discrimination, sexual behavior, violence, and gender-based violence. And they go on to list more. And then they say comprehensive also refers to the breadth and depth of topics and to content that is consistently delivered to learners over time through their education rather than a one-off lesson and intervention. All right, here's another aspect I want you to think about. Health classes, when I was growing up, split between boys and girls. So boys had health class, girls had health class. Both of them were done about reproduction based on biology. So biological terms, scientific terms, all of that. Guess what? For a long time now, and I didn't know this until just a couple years ago, health classes are merged. They're one class for boys and girls together. So I want you to think about all the topics we talked about. And then I want you to imagine being your gender sitting in a classroom with other people of the other gender mixed all together and talking about menstruation, talking about all these different health topics that should be private and respected as private. And yet here you are, a child in a classroom with people of both genders mixed together and talking about these things that I would be embarrassed. I would be humiliated and embarrassed. But again, one of the first things, and you'll find this if you do any investigation into sex trafficking, one of the first things that groomers do is they expose kids to sexual content in order to break down their inhibitions. What do you think this is doing to kids in our schools? Do you not think it's putting them together, making them read excerpts of a graphic novel with a graphic rape scene in front of people of the opposite sex? Does that make any sense? It is to break down their inhibitions. Why? Well, Planned Parenthood is a partner in all this. And my friend, Monica, she used to be a Planned Parenthood teacher in schools. And then she became a Christian and came out of it. And she does speaking engagements to educate people on what is in this comprehensive sex ed that she provided. One of the things that she talked about is she would have the kids sit in a classroom and she would tell them, there's no boundaries. I want you to yell out every slang word for a body part that you know. She said at first you would see these kids like kind of not want to do it. They would be kind of reserved about it and they wouldn't want to participate because they were embarrassed. But then when one did it, then a second one would do it. And then before you knew it, all the kids were yelling out slang terms for body parts. And they had no problem doing it. She said, as a Planned Parenthood educator, it was incorporated into every subject that those kids had at school, including lunchtime, because she would go in and hear them talking about it at lunch, and she would participate in their conversations at lunch. Do you understand the impact to the kids when they're being exposed to this? And it is indoctrination, no doubt. Do you understand how much garbage is going into their brains and sitting there and simmering? Do you think when they come home from school and you say, how was school today? What did you talk about? They're going to tell you? They're not going to tell you. I'm so disgusted by the culture that we're in and all of this being done to our kids. It's horrible. And I know for a fact God is not happy with us as a society. Let's go to slide 20, please. When should sex ed begin? So if you look at the second paragraph, it says, intended to support school-based curricula, the UN's global guidance indicates starting comprehensive sex ed at age 5, when formal education typically begins. However, sex ed is a lifelong process, sometimes beginning earlier at home with trusted caregivers. Learning is incremental. What is taught at the earliest stages is very different from what is taught during puberty and adolescence. With younger learners, teaching about sexuality does not necessarily mean teaching about sex. It says for younger age groups, CSE may help children learn about their bodies and to recognize their feelings and emotions while discussing family life. Why are they talking in school about their family life? It's none of a teacher's business what your kid's family life is like. They're so invasive. And different types of relationships, decision-making, basic principles of consent, and what to do if violence, bullying, or abuse occur. Now, like I said, my son's 30, and in first grade, they started with the Good Touch, Bad Touch program. I had the ability to opt him out, and I did. And the reason I did is because I saw then that was not their job to do. It was my job as a parent to teach him that. I don't know these people. I don't know their take on it. I don't know what they're going to say about it. Again, you have to think it's not necessarily what is taught, it's how it's taught. Okay? So tone is everything. They have to teach what's in writing. They have to teach that at minimum, but that doesn't prevent them from throwing in their own thoughts about it. It doesn't prevent them from saying things off script. And you as a parent are entitled to know what curriculum is being taught. But guess what? Their thoughts, their opinions, their values are not curriculum. The curriculum is just, these are the standard things we have to teach. It's not how they teach them. So you have to be so careful. We're going to go now to the genderbread person. You might have heard about it. This is something that is being used in preschools to teach kids. So here you can see there's identity, there's attraction, there's sex, there's expression. And they start off with these little things. But you see, they've got the body parts sectioned off there and indicated. They indicate on the webpage, and you can find this yourselves there's a reference below. But when they talk about gender identity, for example, Josh, I think this is on the next one. Yeah. When they talk about gender identity, they say things like womanness or manness. Gender expression, on the other hand, is femininity or masculinity. And then you have anatomical sex, which is femaleness or maleness. Did you have any idea there was that much to it? I mean, this is what they're teaching our kids. What does this stuff even mean? How is womanness different from femininity, which is different from femaleness? I mean, it's stupid. So then they show identity does not equal expression, and that does not equal sex. And they have boxes for sex assigned at birth. This is a little workbook, by the way, that, again, there's a link to below. So then you have sexually attracted to woman. I don't even know what the and or woman and or feminine and or female people, or men and or masculine and or male people. And then you have romantically attracted to. Those are two different things. Sexually attracted to, romantically attracted to. Women and or feminine and or female people, or men and or masculine and or male people. Who's the author of confusion? Right? It's not God. Do you find this to be completely confusing? And do you think this is really appropriate for preschool kids? Because that's who the target audience is for this. I don't know about you, but I'm just completely flabbergasted at where we are as a society. How did we get here? How did we end up here? Again, it's like living in an alternate universe when you start to wake up. Because you have no idea. It's so weird. I don't know how this happened, but I know it is happening. And when you have a responsibility to do something about it. That's why I'm doing these videos. What are you going to do with it? Let's go to slide 21. Does sexuality and education encourage masturbation? This is actually in their technical guidance again. I'm not even going to read through that because I'm going to let y'all read it on your own time. Let's go to slide 22, please. Josh, the producer. Thank you. Slide 22. What is the impact of abstinence-based programs? They're claiming that there's clear evidence that abstinence-only programs, which instruct young people not to have sex outside of marriage, are ineffective in preventing early sexual activity and risk-taking behavior, and potentially harmful to young people's sexual and reproductive youth. Have you heard of such a thing? They're talking about abstinence-only programs are harmful to young people's sexual and reproductive health. How is that? It says CSE therefore addresses safer sex, preparing young people after careful decision making for intimate relationships that may include sexual intercourse or other sexual activity. Evidence shows that such an approach is associated with later onset of sexual activity, reduced practice of risky sexual behaviors, and increased contraception use. I call BS on this, and I'm going to tell you why. There hasn't been a decrease in teen pregnancy since sex ed was introduced. There has not. There's been an increase in abortions. Go back to Planned Parenthood. What's their business model? They always say they don't just do abortions, they do women's reproductive health. They do. They give you birth control. All right. They give you birth control and they do abortions. So and they teach sex ed, comprehensive sex ed in schools. So you learn about sex and then you may end up pregnant and you need an abortion. So there's too many piles right there. And then after you have an abortion, you get birth control, or, that's 3, or maybe you get comprehensive sex ed and you get birth control, but then you accidentally get pregnant. Then you have an abortion. Then you go back to the birth control. Do you understand the business model here? It's a money maker, no matter what. Thank you, Monica, for exposing that to me. It's a money-making scheme. They handle all ends of the spectrum. Start with the little ones. Teach them everything you can teach them, because you know what? That plants seeds of curiosity. We all know that. Kids see things, they're naturally curious. They want to dive into it deeper. That's why I was saying planting these seeds of thoughts get then entertained and then become actions. Not always, but I can tell you it does work that way in general. So it feels to me like that's their agenda. And also in Indiana, we've been told it's an abstinence-only state. So I can tell you, though, in research, they have to teach abstinence, but they don't only have to teach abstinence. They just have to include the abstinence in their teaching. And they have to say that's the best method to prevent any STDs, STIs, whatever you want to call them, pregnancy, and things like that. They promote abstinence only in their speech, but they cover everything else too. And they're not restricted from doing that in the law. So if you think you're in an abstinence only state, you better look into it, because it's written very sneakily. So just know that. Slide 23, please. This is out of their technical document as well. Culturally relevant and context appropriate. CSE fosters respect and responsibility within relationships, supporting learners as they examine, understand, and challenge the ways in which cultural structures, norms, and behaviors affect people's choices and relationships within a specific setting. So again, it's all about social norms. Are you seeing this? And they've said already they want to transform society. It's not a far stretch, folks, and I am not making this stuff up. You have got access to their source documents. I am pulling these directly from their own documents. The next slide, slide 24, goes into what transformative means. I'm going to leave that to you guys to look up and research on your own. I'm not going to dive into that too much, because I think we all have a good understanding by now what transformative means. One thing I will point out in this, in the 4th line, it says strengthening young people's citizenship. Do you see that? CSE contributes to the formation of a fair and compassionate society by empowering individuals and communities, promoting critical thinking skills, and strengthening young people's citizenship. What is young people's citizenship about? What does that mean? And when they say positive values and attitudes towards sex and reproductive health, whose standards are they using? I submit to you that all of this whole push for sex ed and comprehensive sex ed and sexualizing our children, because that's what it is coming from this globalist government, the UN. It's coming directly from there. We talked about there's 135 countries in the world, 134 are in the UN, they're members. So it is a global government already, but it's just kind of a trickle down effect, if you will, into these countries. And our country has had the opportunity not to embrace it, and we've gone full speed ahead with it. When they talk about young people's citizenship, they're not talking about American citizenship. They're talking about global citizenship. When they talk about social norms, they're not talking about America. They're talking about the world. They're talking about transforming the entire world's social structure to be more accepting of all these things. So that's why we've seen the push in our society. Slide 25, I'm just going to show you this little excerpt out of here. When they talk about sex, it says it has different meanings in different languages and different cultural contexts for sexuality. Taking into account a number of variables and diversity of meanings in different languages, the following aspects of sexuality need to be considered in the context of CSE. And it goes on and on and on. Look at the third bullet. Sexuality is linked to power. I told you earlier, they think it's a power thing. If you're having sex, you're exerting power. It's making you powerful. If you're not powerful. So again, this goes back to it's not what they're teaching, it's how they're teaching it. Do you understand now why I'm saying that? If you're telling kids that sexuality is power, what kid doesn't want to be powerful? You're encouraging them to do it. And we know it can be very destructive, not only to kids, but to adults too, to have so many partners. Very destructive in the mental state, the emotional state, everything. It also leads to sexual violence when you have a very promiscuous society. It's, again, kind of like a cult, because they'll die for the rights to do this. We see people like Cardi B all the time, twerking, risque clothing, flaunting her sexuality. How many music videos have that? Again, we talked about, what was it, Josh? The Grammys or the Oscars? Thanks. The Oscars having a naked guy parade across the stage. Why? Do you ever wonder that? Do you ever wonder why, we have billboards that have sexual connotations on them? We're bombarded with it everywhere because they think it's powerful. That's why. But they don't care that it's against what God wants for us. They don't care about that. So who's their master? And again, I'm going to say, is that who you want your kids being taught by? They do not limit it to reproduction or biology. They call it a social construct in this slide. They say it's linked to power. It's just sickening to me. Slide 26. This is another excerpt out of it. I'm getting tired. I'm getting the Biden disease. When they talk about this, they talk about it being a wide range of topics. And about halfway down, let me see if I can find it real quick. Oh, yeah. Let's just read this one because this one's really good. CSE covers a wide range of topics, some of which may be culturally sensitive depending on the context. In many settings, CSE curricula omit or avoid key topics and or place too much emphasis on the mechanics of reproduction without also focusing on responsible sexual behaviors and the importance of healthy and equitable relationships. You see UNESCO there? That's the United Nations education arm. That's what they're referencing there. The omission of key topics will lessen the effectiveness of CSE. So the more you tell, the better. It's not good to withhold information about sex from kids. You understand what they're saying there? Let me read that again. The omission of key topics will lessen the effectiveness of comprehensive sex ed. I told you everything is on the table with CSE. For example, failure to discuss menstruation can contribute to the persistence of negative social and cultural attitudes towards it. This may negatively impact the lives of girls, contributing to lifelong discomfort about their bodies and leading to reticence in seeking help when problems arise. Other examples include sexual intercourse, scientific information about prevention of pregnancy. Notice they said scientific, right? The SRH needs of young people living with disabilities or HIV, unsafe abortion and harmful practices such as CEFM and FGMC. I don't even know what that stands for. Or discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. There we are again. Again, they're teaching kids homosexual sex. Do you get that? Homosexual sex acts. They're teaching them how to do them. Silencing or omitting these topics can contribute to stigma, shame, and ignorance, may increase risk-taking, and create help-seeking barriers for vulnerable or marginalized populations. And somehow when I read that, Josh, I just heard myself seeing a commercial for a pharmaceutical product. You know how at the end they say, this can lead to da-da-da-da. That's what I just read there. Okay, let's go to slide 27. Getting close. And here they're claiming schools play a central role in the provision of CSE. So again, if you think your school's not teaching comprehensive sex ed, it is, I guarantee it. This is something they're pushing and that the U.S. has embraced. And I'm not going to read this to you. Go look it up for yourself. That is proof that schools are expected to use this curriculum worldwide. There's so much more. So in the references below, you're going to find a link to Planned Parenthood, and that's their sex ed in the U.S. document. Again, there's birth control, there's sex toys and acts, there's pregnancy and abortion, and then you have an already sexually active child, and then you just repeat the cycle. That's their money wager there. And then slide 28, sex education worldwide. Again, pointing to the fact that it is a worldwide initiative and who's in charge of it and who's connected to it. So I think I've been able to demonstrate to you not only all the organizations that are involved in this push towards sex ed with siecus, the WHO, you're talking Planned Parenthood. WHO basically is the arm of the UN and they're the authority basically, but there's so many other organizations too. And UNESCO, which is part of the United Nations education arm, the National Education Association or NEA partners with Advocates for Youth. And I wish I had time. I don't have time. But if you have time on your own, look up amaze.org on YouTube. Go to that channel and just start scrolling through some of the videos. Titles will catch your eye. I guarantee it. Titles will catch your eye. But you might just want to keep watching because there's content in there, and they make the videos for children. They're cartoons about very sensitive topics. They promote them using slang, so they're not scientifically accurate. They don't care about the scientific part. There's usually a teacher and kids involved. So there's relationships there. There's a social aspect included. They're about 10-minute videos. And guess what? Those are not considered curriculum. So you as a parent don't even have to know that the teacher uses them in class. And they do. They're about 10-minute videos. They can pull them up as what they call a resource. If Johnny wasn't quite understanding a topic, they can pull over the TV and play the YouTube video for 10 minutes, and your kids are exposed to it. If you ask them, they probably have already seen it. And then there's something called the New Venture Fund, which gets money from the NEA, who in turn gives money to the Advocates for Youth, who then in turn make the amaze.org videos. And then you have pornographic materials via books and YouTube. And I mentioned before, I believe that I have a personal library of some of the books that are in schools that we found in Indiana. And they're just because they're cartoons, like they're illustrations, doesn't mean it's not porn, okay? You can draw a pornographic illustration. It's the same thing. You might have to use a little more imagination. It's not in your face as plain as day, but it's still an illustration and it's still porn. It doesn't make it not porn because it's drawn as an illustration. And I'll leave it at that because you can use your imagination to understand what all is in these books for little kids. So in closing, I just want to say I hope you learned a lot about the education side of things and the influences on our kids in this culture war. This is so much a passion of mine. And I want to do everything I can to educate parents and expose it so that you know exactly who's behind it, so you know how to fight it, okay? So be sure to make sure that you're tuned into your schools, that you're really addressing this with your kids. Get involved in a school board if you want. Make sure you're following the legislation about education because every state always has an education committee, it seems like, and they always have education bills. And it's important to stay on top of that because that directly affects your personal kids' schools. We're talking local politics. We're talking state. We're talking town. We're talking city politics. Follow it all because it impacts your kids. Another thing, I think it's important to call your senators and congressmen and congresswomen if there's bills or that are proposed or going through that you don't agree with, and also that you do agree with. Make sure you stay in touch with them. And the reason I laughed is because my personal state senator is not someone who would agree with me on any of this. So it's really pointless for me to call him, I think. But, use your own judgment. Get to know your politicians. I really firmly believe at this point in time, we're so far gone in our education system that homeschooling is a very viable option. Not only is it better for your kids as far as the exposure to things that you don't want them exposed to as a Christian, it's also so much more easy now to do homeschooling. There are micro schools. There are co-ops. Homeschooling has come a long way. And I always thought it was like an all-day thing every week to educate like in a homeschool situation. And I never did it because I thought, I work. I'm a single mom. I can't homeschool all day. I have to bring in income, right? But it's not that way anymore. It's so different now. There's so many options now. And if you're looking for a homeschool type of reference or somebody to reach out to, put a comment down so that we see it because we can probably help you identify homeschool options in your area or at least connections. Some schools even have it. Another option you can do is run for office. I'm going to keep saying that. And of course, pray, 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 because we will be held accountable for what we do as parents, and doing nothing is not an option. So I want to say, very last thing, if you like this content and you want to know more, be sure to subscribe to Revolver Broadcasting. Click the notification bell, like, share, and also drop a comment because this will be my 6th episode and I'm not sure the reception. So good or bad, drop a comment so I know what you think about it. And then also, I just want to say a special thanks to Josh, the producer with Revolver Broadcasting, and make sure you go to revolverbroadcasting.com and check out the shows and the different podcasts and content there. It's a fabulous company. Highly recommend it, obviously. And with that, I'm saying good night.